Studies have shown that learning your native language, learning any language, but especially your ancestral tongue, brings feelings of comfort and freedom. And especially when considering our past and our heritage, learning Irish is very revealing and very healing. So we're hearing the echoes of our parents and grandparents and Irish writers in the Irish sounds and in the syntax and in the words themselves. It is such a tender.
That was the voice of Mollie Guidera, better known as Irish with Mollie, your online guide to the Irish language. And I'm John Lee.
Agus is Misha Martin Nutty, tá fáilte ród a rís go dtí an podcréile.
This episode is sponsored by Shantala, your all-in-one business launchpad in the United States. Committed to excellence and execution, Shantala helps enterprises enter or expand in the U.S. market through bespoke project management and strategic planning solutions. Create and realize your vision with Shantala, where they invest their passion in your future success. To learn more, go to shantala.space. Yes, .space. It's a thing.
A dtíine uasla tá fáilte roimh sé a rís go dtí an podcréile is Misha Martin Nutty agus tá sibh ag éisteach leis Irish Stew. Tá Seán Lee in éanach lumsa. Cén size cuairteoir a bheith chuin inniu a cheann?
Oh my, Martin's done it to me again, exposing my lack of the knowledge of the Irish language. Mollie, what did he just say?
He said, what kind of visitor do we have today, a Hjáin, John?
Well, we have a visitor that's going to help us guide us through the story of the Irish language and also get us inspired to learn it ourselves, as she has done to me as I've started to take her course. I know her as Irish with Mollie, as does about 125,000 Instagram followers and about 15,000 followers on TikTok, where I first found you, Mollie. Mollie Guidera, I think, is the English version of your name, but what is the Irish version?
It's Mollie Guidera.
Mollie Guidera. Well, Mollie first gave her, according to her bio, gave her first Irish lesson at age 7 to an American cousin. Do you remember that lesson?
Vaguely, yes. I remember the Thanksgiving dinner better that they made for us. So maybe
American
it was
style. They're good. And in attending an Irish college, an all-Irish college in the Gaeltacht, you got yourself thrown out.
I did. Yeah, it was very strict. It was the strictest Coláiste in the country. And I said one sentence in English and they put me on the train back to Dublin from Galway.
All
so
right.
I'll never get over it. I'm still bitter.
I think we'll get into that in a little more detail. You received your teaching certification at Cambridge. And it's one thing that I noticed. I've tried learning languages on my own. You have a teacher's approach. You have techniques and tools and tricks that I almost don't see are coming, but you sort of drop these little hints into your classes, a much better structure than anything I've encountered so far in trying to learn languages. And in your career, you have taught, or do currently teach, you've taught English and Irish. So let me ask you, which language do you dream in?
Great question. I often think of structures in a meta way in Irish, working out sentences and phrases. But in a way, I don't think dreams have a language. I think you might dream of a phrase or a dialogue or, a conversation with someone in a language. But sometimes the ideas or the fears or the joy of the dream is not really in either language. But it's a great question, yeah.
Well, then let's bring it back out to the real world. Which language do you curse in?
I think in a mixture, but sometimes in Irish, and I love when that happens, when my default response, no matter where I am in the world, is "Gumaleshgale," like "excuse me," or a "Yiwa," like "oh devil," when it just comes to me, it's in Irish.
It might come up later, and our listeners are bored with hearing me say it, but I'm married to an Italian woman, and I've made sort of stumbling attempts to learn Italian, not doing that well. I have my own personal Italian curse word, struzzo. which means ostrich. But to me, it just sounds, it just sounds, well, enough of that. Let's find out where you came from and, how it was your American cousins were visiting and what made your Irish language so central for you.
Yeah. So growing up, I grew up in Dublin, but my family are all from Munster, from Tipperary. And I spent a lot of time on the West Coast in County Mayo. So in a way, I don't really feel like a true dub. But at home, we had a positive relationship with Irish overall because my mum was a primary school teacher. So, and my school thankfully had a lot of Irish, even though it wasn't a Gael school, we had Irish in our ears all the time. So all the instruction was through Irish and different just different phrases the teachers would use would be in Irish. And I remember that visit from our cousins from, I can't remember, was it North or South Carolina? They came over for Thanksgiving, made us a huge feast. And I took on the duty of teaching my cousin Amy Irish. And I made a little booklet with the colors and the numbers and the animals in Irish. And I remember she was quite fascinated, that this 7-year-old could just come up with this and think in 2 different languages. But for me, it was also a moment of realization like, wow, she only speaks English or she doesn't know these Irish words. And how amazing that she looks at this word. For example, let's say quera for sheep. And I see quera, but she might see keora or kira. And the sounds and the phonemes don't jump off the page at her. So it's interesting at school. I loved school. I loved, in particular, English, actually, and history and French and Spanish and geography. I never imagined I'd become a teacher. But there's a lot of evidence of maybe a teacher being in me, as we would say in Irish, vimuntur unum. So there was a teacher in me, like just creating like quizzes for my brothers on the summer holidays or teaching my friends Irish dancing in the back garden. And I really wanted to be a lawyer or speech and language therapist or a psychologist at different points. And then I studied English literature and language after school. And I started traveling and I met other teachers who traveled. And some of them recommended this Cambridge course and it allowed them so much freedom and just opportunities to see the world. And I had so many different jobs around the world, like ski instructor and camp counselor in the Swiss Alps and volunteer in Ibiza and different teaching jobs that I started to think of the English language slightly differently, being away from Ireland and thinking English takes over other languages. English is killing minority languages. I started to think of Irish in a very different way. It's a vulnerable language, our indigenous language, our native language, official language, and started to miss it in a big way. I talk about the connection between koa, which is homesickness, and coacht, which is power. And a lot of people outside of Ireland, a lot of the diaspora have this intangible or very keen longing and urge to reconnect. But it's a power that comes with it and a powerful mindset, an openness and a motivation that maybe some people in Ireland don't have.
Interesting.
So you refer to the fact that you traveled extensively. How did that change your view of Ireland? Because I think, the old saw is that you only ever really understand a country when you leave it. So what were your moments of realization where you realized that your experience as an Irish person, as being of Ireland, became more central?
I think it helped me develop a curiosity that was looking at it from a new lens and perspective. Relearning the Ceilidh dances, for example. I taught Zumba and English on the Peace Boat, which is a UN-sponsored NGO cruise ship that sails around the world, fostering conflict resolution and peace studies. And there were about 990 Japanese students on board. I was 25 years old thinking, oh, it's like a university at sea. But it was a bit more like a nursing home at sea because everyone was in their 80s,
No.
70s and 80s. And they were amazing. And as soon as they found out, oh, she's Irish, they were like, we don't need to learn English. Let's learn Irish. Let's learn the Walls of Limerick. And we were practicing these Cayley dances on the top deck of the cruise ship daily because the Japanese love persistence, practice, and progress. So I think it really gave me a new appreciation of Irish culture, history. You know, I was celebrating and organizing St. Patrick's Day on board, things like that. And when I was teaching in schools, I taught for International House in Hungary and Spain and Portugal. And I started, maybe just having more of an essence of what is Irishness, what is to be celebrated. And I think I brought that into the teaching of the language as well. Like, what do people really want to know? And these are some things that Irish people don't know, despite having 14 years of compulsory education.
Mm. You know, it's interesting. We had Monaghan Magan on the podcast, and he made a film or a series of television shows called No Berla, where he tries to travel around Ireland and will only communicate Oscuelga or through Irish. And he talks about being ejected from certain places because just people just get annoyed at him. And then he recounts the story afterwards of looking at the rushes, you know, the first cut of the video. And he was less focused on people's anger and more on what he called their shame. And, you know, when you mention the fact that, you know, people, you know, don't know a lot after 14 years of education, that's something that I hear a lot. You know, I had 14 years of you know, Irish language education, and Neil Fuckalawine agam, right? I don't have a word, which actually quite a few of them can say, so they actually do have more than a word. But you want to talk a little bit about anger and the language and, you know, unwillingness to embrace it?
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. You brought up that phrase, I don't have a word of Irish. That in itself is an Irish structure. To have a language, we say in Irish, tá gaeilge agam, or even to have a skill, like tá snámh agam, I have swimming. We say it like that instead of I'm able to swim. Whereas in Australian English, American English, British English, you don't really say, I have French, I have Spanish. But in Ireland, you do, because it's like we're still speaking Irish, just using English words. And I agree with what you said, Martin, like people really have a deep resentment and shame about the language. I think a fear of speaking it because they think they should be fluent. They know that, oh, how do I not speak my own native language? And maybe they speak better French or German or, you know, Mandarin or other languages. And a lot of it has to do with maybe the pressure that it's an exam. You know, you have to study for this exam and therefore you're learning a script. And I've met people who are age 18. We might do a few sessions before their exam to get them ready. And they're really ambitious and they're going to get an A, but they don't know how to veer off script. But I forget that because I'm used to teaching people from all over the world, including Ireland, but I teach them in a way that makes them feel confident and competent in the language. So if I ask them, what did you eat for breakfast? And they say, pancakes. Oh, how did you make them? What recipe have you got? We veer off script, as it were. Whereas in this exam, it's like, what are your hobbies? Okay, tell me about your family.
Right.
Next, what are the social problems in your area? And it doesn't make sense because that's not natural communication. But for some reason, so much energy and time goes into practicing those structures instead of learning the language and knowing, what's this verb in the past? Oh, I can conjugate it.
Yeah, it's like a lack of Cora skills, so to speak, or conversational skills, the kind of give and take that you'd have in normal conversation.
Yeah.
But just curious, you obviously had a more benign encounter with the language through the educational system. When you're, reciting a story of teaching another 7-year-old about the language, my sense is that kind of activity didn't come out of a distaste for the language. And it came out from hey, I know this stuff and I kind of like the fact that I know this stuff and I'm going to try and teach you a little bit about it, right? So talk to me about what was working in your particular situation, or I assume you recall that?
I think it was more of a healthy, happy environment with Irish for primary school, because from age 4 to 12, in my school anyway, and I think in schools around the country, there is quite a positive aspect to Irish. It's on the wall, you learn songs, you learn poems, you might throw in a cúpla focal, a few words every day, like the teacher might say, bula bus, clapping hands, like I said to you earlier, John. And really make it into a living language. Whereas in secondary school, things do change, because if you don't pass Irish for your leaving cert, you don't get into college, which is a huge deal. You need to pass 3 core subjects, Irish, English, and maths. And they're all at a very high level. So I think, thankfully, trips to the Gaeltacht every summer helped me kind of maintain a love for the language. But it wasn't that case for everyone. And at school, I mean, I don't think even the teacher spoke much Irish. It was just a case of racing against time to get this exam, to get us ready for the exam, basically. And the more I learn and the more I teach, I think it needs a total turnaround. There should not be exemptions for Irish. So many children get exemptions because they move to Ireland after the age of 7, or they have dyslexia, or they have other learning needs. And that's like saying you're not able to learn the language because you're not going to pass the exam, or it doesn't really make sense. If you think of Quebec in Canada, they have such a holistic approach to the language that children are learning bilingually and appreciating the language, and there's not the stress on it. And I think people might achieve a much higher level of fluency. Another thing is, what is fluency? People are very obsessed with the idea that they're going to speak fluently on a wide array of subjects. And talking to Richard Simcott recently, who is a hyper polyglot and he's studied over 50 languages, he said, try to learn what you want to learn. Like, why are you learning Irish? Maybe you're learning to have an annual conversation with your relatives. In that case, you don't need to race to fluency and beat yourself up over not being perfect. Or maybe you want to write notes every day, so you need to learn that kind of language. And just with more realism, or, I don't know, more kindness to yourself and an openness, you'll achieve more and get there.
Well, Mollie, let me ask you about something you mentioned earlier. I wanted to follow up on about sort of how, I'll tell a little anecdote and then we'll get into the question. A few years ago, I was just beginning to get curious about Irish, and I found some Irish newscasts on YouTube. So I was just listening, not knowing really what they were talking about, but making some association with the words and the pictures, and kind of just listening to the language. I mean, maybe for half an hour, 45 minutes, I was just kind of maybe doing other things, listening to the language. And then an Irish friend of mine called me right then, a woman who had just been over to the U.S. for a month or so. And I had this little kind of Twilight Zone moment of, she was speaking English, but she's speaking Irish. There was something so similar to the newscasters I was just listening to. I knew she was speaking English, but it almost sounded like a new language to me. So how does English show up in Irish? How does Irish show up in English? I mean, maybe in terms of vocabulary, but just how does that ancient structure of Irish live on, even if you're not speaking the language?
Yeah, in many ways. And I think maybe that's something I also learned traveling, that I speak differently to everyone else. And I'm even teaching English differently to other people. If I'm saying, "What age are you?" to a 5-year-old, they're like, I think I've learned, "How old are you?" But I got that from Cain Ish, who in Irish, "What age are you?" Or even do you have? There is no verb to have in Irish. We say things are at us. But you might say, do you have a pen? And my British colleagues might have said, have you got? So many different ways we use, well, Irish English works. And things like the present perfect, there is no present perfect in Irish. Like, I have seen John, I have spoken to Martin. We say, I'm after speaking to John, I'm after doing this and doing that. So the syntax and the structure and order of the words is really impacted by Irish. Even things like, that's gas altogether. Like, that's so funny. We had great crack altogether. Using altogether as that type of intensifier doesn't exist in other dialects of English. You might say, it was altogether wonderful. But that one wouldn't exist in Irish English. And it's because we use fad, meaning at length or absolutely, at the end of the sentence in Irish. So there's a huge amount of loan words as well, words that we use in English. You know, even like the bog, where you cut turf, the bog comes from bug, meaning soft in Irish. And words like even have a sup of a drink, coming from sup, to take a sip in Irish. So many words, even an unmarked plurality, like you might say 5 mile down the road instead of 5 miles, because in Irish, we don't pluralize the noun after counting things. So many ways that Irish people speak differently and maybe get mocked for it when they move abroad, or, you know, it's noticed anyway. Even I remember my first teaching job was in the Basque Country. Even the way I pronounced the letter or, my director of studies said, try to use ah or r, because the children won't understand when you're spelling things, because saying the letter or sounds to them like O or something. So I think many of these experiences kind of taught me, well, I'm proud of Irish and I'm proud to be Irish and to be an Irish English speaker and an Irish speaker.
Mollie, I get mocked here on Irish stew for the way I pronounce the word stew. Apparently, it's not the way the Irish use the word. So, you know, I'm used to that. How do new words enter the language? Such an ancient language, so many new words. How about slang? Where does that come from, and how does it work its way in?
So there's a body called Ferris na Gaeilge, and there's 2 etymologists, 2 people who have a full-time paid position entering new words. Anyone can come up with a new word and you can submit it. And these 2 professionals put it into the dictionary. I think they might, you know, research first how frequently it's used. And words like éist féist recently, which is an earworm, which literally comes from éist, the verb to listen, and péist is a monster or a pest or a worm even. So a catchy tune is an éist féist. And gyanvala is another great one, which means affection deceiving. So like a love bomb, to love bomb someone. So it's cool. And I think I read that about 30 new words enter the dictionary every year into the Irish dictionary, but also Irish words are entering English dictionaries, like the word gra. I have it on my necklace, actually. Gra is love. So people are throwing in an Irish word into their English lexicon, like, I have a great gra for Ireland, a great love for Ireland. And obviously words, older words have entered the English dictionary, like brogue, you know, meaning shoe. And slew is from slua, a crowd, a slew of people.
So it's interesting. What you're obviously pointing out is the language is evolving. It has to evolve because it's a living language. And what I want to talk a little bit about is the kind of correctness that you will get from people, that it is, to speak Irish, it must be said precisely this way. And of course, there are 3 major dialects in Ireland, and they are somewhat different. And I'm also reminded by the old seanokul, which is old word or old saying, is Farlum Gaelga Brista na Berla Tlista, meaning I prefer broken Irish rather than clever English, which I think, I don't know how seanokul that is, or whether that's something that people came up with recently to encourage people to say, you don't have to be perfect. And I think it kind of ties back to this educational thing where it has to be absolutely precise to pass the exam, that's required in Irish secondary schools. So I'd be curious to hear, your approach sounds more like the Shanukal way of, go ahead, have a go, you'll make a mistake. That's okay. The language evolves and changes and grows, etc., and we all learn from each other. But you want to expand a little bit on your thinking around that?
Definitely. And I'm glad you brought that up, Martin. I know there are a lot of differing views on this, and people say that the official standard, which is what I teach,
Chain or something, right? Is that what they call it? Gaelga Chain?
Caidán.
Kainon, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Caidán of Fagul, the official standard that they say it's school Irish, or it's maybe not as rich as ancient versions of Irish or other dialects, but it is very closely intertwined with Munster and Connacht Irish and has elements of all the dialects in it. And there's a great educator, researcher, writer, Jerry Kelly in the States, Irish professor, who says there are as many dialects as speakers of the language. And I tend to agree with him. I don't see the point of learners getting frustrated at the very beginning. Oh, what dialect? Where are you from, Mollie? Oh, because my ancestors are from Donegal, so I have to learn Donegal Irish. I'm thinking that is just going to hold you back. First of all, it might be difficult to find an Irish teacher from that exact area. Secondly, are you only going to speak with people from that area? Or, they're not that wildly different. You can definitely understand each other, and you need the basics. You need a solid foundation to get going, which comes back to is fiar Gaeilge bhriste ná béarla cliste. Broken Irish is better than clever English, because you cannot speak cleverly, accurately, beautifully, or well unless you make mistakes. You have to start somewhere. You're not going to just burst into eloquent, articulate speech after studying for years. That said, I've had some students who had no one to practice with before my course came along, or they have a community, and they are speaking pretty well. They're practicing with themselves or their pets, or, whoever they, or even them, just practicing as much as they can. But I do think that at the end of the day, the language is listed as definitely endangered on the UNESCO Atlas of World Languages. And only 40% of Irish people in the most recent census said that they can speak Irish. And only 10% of that group said that they can speak it well. And 25% of them said they never speak it. So why make people feel like they need to be perfect or speak old versions? At the end of the day, even English has archaic or obsolete versions that we don't use anymore. And another interesting argument is like, that accent is wrong or whatever. I do think that, certain sounds should be preserved and encouraged. And I try to promote these sounds and teach them to the best of my ability, like the CH, maybe on the news, sometimes you hear about the Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, and they don't really do the soft T or the at the end. They might say, the Taoiseach is here today. And I think that's a bit of a shame. It should be, there should be an effort made, but I don't believe that, people should be criticized for having a Dublin accent when speaking Irish or an American accent. Who cares? They're trying, and if they're communicating and always getting better, that's the main thing.
Yeah, just thinking along those lines, the, Gaeilge bhriste, the broken Irish approach. I have a habit now when I visit Ireland, and I kind of wonder whether I'm annoying people, that I'll throw in a cúpla focal. It could be as simple as just saying when I buy something at a shop and I receive a guramagat, or when I go in and order something, bawal whatever. Is that something that I think we should be encouraging people to do, to throw in words of Irish, even though they're primarily communicating in English? In other words, every day I'm going to use X amount of Irish. I'm kind of making a point of that. And so I don't have to have a very big vocabulary to do that. I just need to be able to use, as you say, a cúpla focal, a couple of words.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, and definitely something I would recommend for people because it increases your confidence. You know, you're making an effort to use a couple of focal, a couple of words, and the person who's listening, a lot of Irish people really want to use their Irish. So you're giving other people an opportunity. And, you know, it's simple enough. It's things like please and thank you and I would like. If people don't understand, you can teach it to them, even better. And I always say, like, try to include, you know, gra more, big love at the end of a text message or an email or something like le mas, with respect, or achara, dear friend. Because even if it's a mix of Irish and English, you're using more Irish, and only about 1.7% of the population uses Irish on a daily basis outside the education system. So anything we can do to increase that number is good, even if it's half a sentence or 2 words out of 10.
Mollie, if I go to Ireland before I've completed your course and I've mastered the language after the second part of the course, and I use a few Irish words, am I going to stamp myself as even more of a plastic patty than I already am?
I think as long as you're not saying, do you do it instead of do you which? I think it's remarkable that Irish Americans and people around the world are learning Irish, making a great effort and preserving the language and bringing it back to Ireland. And from my experience, and a lot of my students who are doing that and ordering stuff in Irish, speaking to locals in Irish, they get a great response. They even tearful, emotional responses, people saying, wow, that is impressive, because you might not realize how much you're learning, how much you're able to say, and how confident you are in a way compared with the Irish who might have been traumatized. You know, Irish people with their education, people feel like Irish was beaten into them. Right. And the fact is English was beaten into us. So without that trauma, without that burden, a lot of people are coming over and just saying it happily, confidently, saying it well. And it's inspiring. It's really inspiring.
Interesting. None of the emotional baggage connected with it. That's really interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about the course and what has made you an influencer on social media. And I came across you on TikTok, and as I mentioned, I really find languages very interesting. I watch a lot of videos about languages, what makes them different, what they're related to. I'm not very good at speaking different languages. But anyway, I started listening to your TikTok videos, and you bring out a lot of ways of looking at the language that just would be of interest, I think, to almost anyone, even if you didn't pursue learning Irish. If you're just interested in the way languages influence the way you live, the way you think, I think people would find it interesting. So that was my entry point in learning about you. And you have very, great voice and very warm and very approachable. I said something to Martin. We were sort of talking about this call before, and I said, well, no, Mollie told me yesterday. No, wait, Mollie didn't tell me. The course, Mollie on camera in the course told me. So anyway, there's a very personal connection. But let's talk about the course and what brought you. It's a very sophisticated, really worked out, full-featured, couldn't have happened overnight. Tell us about Irish with Mollie, the evolution of it, the origin of it, and how's it going now?
Thank you. I really appreciate that feedback. It's really fulfilling, creative, and rewarding as a process. And basically, I was teaching Irish online. I started teaching English online, and then they asked me if I would teach Irish. I developed a lot of materials, seeing that, materials of Irish and resources, it's like they're written for fluent speakers, but the exercises are basic. So it's very difficult sometimes for a beginner to take that leap. So I created what I knew from language teaching and language learning, a style that was more effective, engaging, approachable, and accessible. And then I thought a course where people can learn in their own time, access the material, rewatch everything, have lifetime access, have a community where they can share what they're learning, a Zoom room where they can practice speaking and listening, quizzes, and break it down in a logical way that really just makes sense. Because Irish people in Ireland learn Irish kind of, it's taken for granted in a way. Oh, you know that sound. And, oh, you know what the shevu is, Lanishan, or you know what the uru is. But it's not very clear to a lot of people. So I wanted to create something that was really starting from scratch. You know, we start with the verb, for example. Only 9% of all the world languages start with the verb. Why? Well, maybe because Irish is so action oriented and Irish people are such good storytellers. Maybe that's a link there. So to make it more memorable, playful, and relevant. But basically, the course, I had done a few courses online, like neuro-linguistic programming and cognitive behavioral therapy. And I love the feeling that you felt drawn in, you felt connected to the educator, and you really felt like they're your friend in a way. Like you can ask them anything you want, you can reach out, but you can also stop and rewind and fast forward. So I put together all my materials, I designed it using graphic design tools, etc. And I launched it in October last year, 2022. That was the beginner course. And it just took off. I had a launch over 5 days and I couldn't have imagined the success of it. It was really invigorating, really amazing to feel people are so enthusiastic about Irish and just really wanted a new method and a new way to connect with their ancestral tongue. And then I created the intermediate course. So that was in the making for years as well, and launched that in January of this year. And it's going great. It's totally different to what I was doing. I was teaching one-to-ones. I was teaching a lot of the same material again and again. You know, people would have their lesson once a week, but have no access to me during the week. And if they had a question, they might forget about it, but they might have felt very alone. I had students in Manchester and, you know, Australia and all over the world. And now it's like they can all come together. They can all share their experiences. They can listen to other people's questions in our Telegram group, in our Zoom room. And they also have my daily support. So they can reach out anytime and I can respond. I have more free time in a way and more time to develop more resources.
We often get some interesting business stories when we're talking to people. Particularly, I find people in the creative world have some great business ideas that that they need to employ to be to be successful, to maintain what they're doing. And it looks like you've figured out how to scale, which is always that goal you hear about in startup businesses. You're taking what used to be one-on-one and could spread it to almost unlimited number of people. Well, maybe not unlimited because you do respond to all those messages and emails.
That's true. Yeah, it's been amazing. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunity and also the way that people connect with the course, that they really feel things are clicking, things are making sense. It's all coming together. And in a way, I feel maybe the distance from Ireland and the me working it out, thinking about other languages and thinking about my English teaching experience. How should a language be taught as a language, not as an exam subject, becomes much more effective and useful.
Well, I'm in my very earliest stages. I've gone through the preliminary section, which basically kind of sets up what lies ahead, what the resources are. And then I think I'd say I had my first real class because there was a quiz at the end, and I was nervous as I went into my first exam. But it's a section about like the sort of, I think it's the 7 essential differences of Irish or the things to be aware of. Maybe pick out 1 or 2.
Yes, so these I called the features of the language. And it's amazing that these are not explained in other courses or at school. My mom was a primary school teacher and she said she only really found out about masculine and feminine nouns in her 40s after about 20 years of teaching. So even speaking recently to primary school teachers, they said, oh, it's too complicated when the kid asks, why is there a H now in aninog, the window, when fuinog with no H is the word window? And I'm thinking, set it up at the beginning. It might be a lot to take on. It might be kind of overwhelming. Make it fun, make it playful. You need to know from the beginning, this happens in these circumstances. So that's 1, masculine and feminine nouns, a bit like French or Spanish, Portuguese, other languages have masculine and feminine nouns, but it's something we never really learned at school. And it would have made so much more sense in actually understanding the language. So if you want to enjoy and understand Irish, It needs to be rethought, to be revitalized. And it's much more accessible than people think. It's so much more consistent and logical and satisfying to learn. It's full of patterns.
So I note in the bio that we put together for you that you taught in both the Basque in northern Spain and in Hungary. Now, along with Finland, I understand the languages of those three regions/countries are some of the most difficult to learn because they don't really connect to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what you drew from that experience, and did it inform putting together your course?
I think it did subconsciously, seeing the pride and joy that the Basque people have for their language. It is so well preserved. It's pretty astounding because, they all speak Spanish as well, basically. And the Spanish people I also taught in Andalusia, their level of English, for example, was not that great. And I think when you're a big country and all the media is dubbed, you've no real need to learn English unless you're moving out of Spain. But in the Basque Country, it is a matter of pride. It's a mindset. It's a love for who they are and their history and their independence. And that's what needs to come back. And I think it is coming back slowly but surely in Ireland, because English-centric countries where English is one of the first languages, or, the medium language, there isn't really a necessity to learn other languages. So you look at, Dutch people speak German, Dutch, and English really well, and they don't see a problem in learning other languages. Whereas in Ireland, not many people learn other languages to a high level for the joy of it. Or I think, so the Basque Country really taught me that. And in Hungary too, I mean, they call themselves Magyar. And Hungary, I think, is, apart from communities in South America, Hungarian isn't spoken anywhere else apart from in Hungarian communities. And yet everyone speaks Hungarian. It's listed on the top 10 most difficult languages. Yeah, like you said, Basque and Finnish. Irish isn't on that list. It's definitely not one of the most difficult. In fact, I would say it's extremely logical, consistent, and just makes a lot of sense as a language. But I think being in Hungary taught me, here's a country that just also has a lot of pride for who they are and their history. And it's a mindset as well. They don't see another option. They're not going to say, oh, everyone around us is speaking another language, or it would be more effective to speak English. They do speak English as well, but they're holding on to Hungarian for many reasons.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about the Irish language. When I guess, unfortunately, in a way, we're doing it in English. But can we hear some of the Irish language from you? Can you favor us with
Blas Biog?
There you go.
I will. So I chose this poem by Sean O'Riordan called Phil Arish, Return Back. And I'm going to read it in Irish and then in English. And it's just about a minute and a half. And I chose it because a few reasons. I feel like Ireland is returning back to Irish. And this past summer, I was in Dunquin, which is mentioned in the poem, near the Blasket Islands, and went out to the Blasket Islands with my mum. And we had a few glorious days of just speaking Irish together. And it really felt in a way like a poignant kind of homecoming. And I was also reading Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by Joyce recently. And one of his critics, Eric Bulson, wrote, Stephen may never feel at home in the English language, but by using it to articulate an Irish experience, he can make it foreign to the English. So this poem is a lot about syntax and about how we use English in Ireland. So here it is. It is Phil Arish by Sean O'Riordan. Fog glowning yelt her, is a will disha ar dearna adil. Doon de inchin ar harla, o bula cachion talia, is on oor go will an tualach trum, is an boher fada, win ded viauwer, sraher hewieltach an verla. Shelley, Keats is Shakespeare. Philarish de chudj, ní de inchin, is ní de chianga a chui kiangelta. I go réirih. Bhí bunos cion le déirim. Jane dístin is Jane. Siachain led rinúin féinig. Is led higse féin is ná tréig iad. Ní dúl dunneach a hig nor a hrab a shrégan. Ter féwer na fáile siar tróna gréine go curca gwibhne. Is chifer hir ag bun na spére ag ráthíocht ann. An iver dhé is an mó fahíteach. Is an tiisiil garamach bhéileh daoine. Sin é de gharas. Dún chuoin fé tholas an tróna. Búil is os glófar. Din sin féin is de chló ceart.
Go Harleen.
And in English it is return again. Leave the valley of the mad back east, and all there is of this age of our Lord in your blood. Close your mind to what has happened since the Battle of Kinsale. And since the load is heavy and the road long, remove from your mind the civilized halter of English. Shelley, Keats, and Shakespeare. Return again to your own. Cleanse your mind and cleanse your tongue, which got tied up in a syntax at odds with your intellect. Make your confession and make peace with your own race and with your own house, and do not abandon them. It is not natural for anyone to abandon his house or his tribe. On a sunlit evening, take the cliff road out to Kirkagwivna, and out on the horizon, you will see shoaling there the dual number and the subjunctive mood and the vocative case on people's mouths. That is your door. Dunqueen in the evening light, knock and there will be opened your own mind and your right shape.
You know, I think that speaks to all sorts of themes that are probably important for Irish people. And, you know, in our doing this podcast, sometimes people ask me why we do it. And I refer to the fact that I think that rootedness is extremely important. People need to feel that they belong. And I suppose one of the important questions that is often asked is, why should we even bother with this language anymore? It's almost dead. And in talking to people who have a gra or a love for the language, they will say, I'm thinking of Monaghan, Magan particularly, is you cannot ever really understand or engage with a country properly unless you know its language. And this language was built up to basically describe the country around them. And English doesn't quite do it the same service. And of course, his famous book is 32 Words for Field. I think what you're seeing in that poem is the kind of richness of the language. Now, when you were saying it in Ireland, in Irish, I didn't understand every word, but I was picking up a lot of words, and the rhythm of the language was kind of working on me. So the poem also talks about the theme of trauma, you know, after Kinsale. You know, that's an interesting reference. So for a lot of our listeners, they probably don't know what that means, but Kinsale is a big battle that was fought in the 1600s, and it basically began the end of Gaelic Ireland and the colonization of Ireland and the the Englishization of Ireland. So I think in order for the language to take off, you have to accept that Irish people were traumatized by this colonial experience. And I'm not saying to become obsessed with that. What I'm saying is you have to accept that before you can kind of embrace the richness of the language, because for all too often, in my view, it was associated with backwardness, with impoverishment, with almost ignorance. And I'm kind of hopeful, and I think you're alluding to this, so that there is a new age opening up where we no longer define ourselves necessarily by the colonial experience, by being an occupied people. But if you were to kind of say, this is why I think Irish is important for Irish people specifically, meaning people that live or are born in Ireland, what's your pitch for the importance of the language and saying, you really should do this because I think it'll, make you a more complete person?
That's a good point. A complete person. Studies have shown that learning your native language, learning any language, but especially your ancestral tongue, brings feelings of comfort and freedom. And especially when considering our past and our heritage, learning Irish is very revealing and very healing. So we're hearing the echoes of our parents and grandparents and Irish writers in the Irish sounds and in the syntax and in the words themselves. It is such a tender and humorous language that is replete with poetry and magic. It brings to life so many funny and quirky kind of realizations and revelations. And like you say, it's a common question. Why? What is the point? Not many people speak it, or it's a dying language, or you don't need it. But do we need music or art? Do we really need so many friends or family? No, but it makes our life better. And people learning Irish really feel a sense of peace and calm and feeling more understanding about who we are. The Republic of Ireland is relatively young. And I think it's time for Ireland to kind of assert itself at a global level. If you think of the culture of the Irish pub, it's world famous. What do you connote with that? It is warm, welcoming, and it connects people. What about the GAA? Likewise, people all over the world, in every country has a GAA club, even ones in Africa with no Irish people at all who've ever been there, but there's a GAA club. And Irish dancing, it attracts people from all over the world. People are obsessed with it for its vivacity, the liveliness, the music, Irish music and the sessions. Why doesn't the language have that same brand, if you will? I do think colonization has had a massive impact on the language, on the way we communicate and on the way we think about the language. But it's not lost. And we still speak Irish in many ways. We speak it and we speak Irish English. Haunting the way we speak is the Irish language. And if we can change the mindset and help people understand that the Irish language is warm, welcoming, and connecting and inclusive, not only that, it is a joy to speak. It is so uplifting to think in Irish, dream in Irish, express yourself in Irish, and helps us understand, like you say, the land and who we are and our human experience. It gives us a different perspective on reality. Things are at us or on us, before us, beside us. It's a very unusual way of existing in the world that doesn't exist in other languages. So I think there are so many benefits to learning Irish that, in a way, try it and you'll see. You can't really put it into words either. Just give it a go.
Well, you convinced me to do it. I see this Seamus Heaney quote I had pulled up. He's talking about to not learn Irish is to miss the opportunity. It is to cut oneself off from ways of being at home. And I know that's already in my young days as a student here. I feel that coming through in your work and your courses with Irish with Mollie. Speaking of Seamus Heaney, it's time for Seamus Plug, your chance to tell our listeners how they find you and what you'd like them to know more about.
Thank you. Yes. So you can find me on Instagram or TikTok at Irish with Mollie. So Mollie spelled with an IE, Irish with Mollie. And I have a mini course that's free. It's a 4-day course. And like I said, give it a go. If you've been learning Irish forever, you might learn something new. If you are totally new to Irish, you'll pick up, how to express hello, goodbye, please, thank you, some basic phrases. So you can find that at irishwithmollie.com/mini course. And it would be a good introduction to the language, I think. It's totally free. It's a 4-day course. And always, if you like, reach out, send me an email, irishwithmollie@gmail.com. It is a wonderful, blossoming community of worldwide Irish speakers, people from every background, every age, and just people who love Irish and are willing it forward. So it's great to have more people on board.
Well, speaking from personal experience, it seems like, you may be talking to thousands, but it feels like you're just talking to me. I really am enjoying what I'm finding so far and do intend to get to the end and finish and use it the next time I go to Ireland. We can't thank you enough. Also, I just want to make sure, find Mollie on TikTok and in Instagram. That's a great way to sort of get the feel and to see if you'd like to go further with her and with learning the language. So I will list all those things in our show notes, Mollie. Really been good getting to know you. Great spokesperson for the language. And we really appreciate having you here on Irish Stew.
Gurv Mila Magwiv. Thank you both so much. Vud me an tatnavas. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Martin, you hear the expression fully present, and I've never really known what that meant, but somehow it came through to me with Mollie. She's fully present in the way she approaches the Irish language. I am taking the course now. It's a great introduction. She's warm and personable. And hey, I got a perfect score on my first test.
Pat in the back there, Sean, and I expect more to come. One of the senses I got during our Cora or conversation with Mollie was a sense of warmth or welcome. And the word foilta is used a lot in Irish. And that's what comes across in speaking with Mollie. And of course, I'm deeply envious of her beautiful articulation in both Gaeilge agus Berla, both Irish and English. I think I probably need to sign up for elocution lessons for Mollie. But the other thing and the important thing, and especially for Irish-born people like me, is Mollie's bringing another Irish word back into the language, or a sense about the Irish language, is the word crack, fun. Because a lot of the fun was squeezed out of the language because of the mandatory requirements required by the Irish educational system. And a lot of Irish-born people look back at their time in school and their interaction with Irish, especially people of my generation. I'm a good deal older than Mollie. It wasn't a lot of fun. I think her experience was a little bit better, and I think people coming up now in Ireland, that experience is a lot better. So it's important to have a bit of crack, and it is never too late to learn a couple of fuckle. I've done a lot of Duolingo in the last year or so, and I've improved a lot. But what Mollie's offering is a more complete product, in my view, and an opportunity to engage with people globally, as Gaeilge, through Irish. And I think that's hugely important, and bringing this kind of really nice, fresh approach towards teaching the language. Just really impressive.
And, there's the question of why learn Irish? What do you get out of it? And as I mentioned, Mollie's got a great social media presence on TikTok. One of her more recent videos, I think, she talks about what her students say to her about what learning Irish has meant to them. And these are the words that she focuses on: alive, safe, more at home, happier, fulfilled, like a better person, connected, aligned. So I look forward to becoming much more aligned with my Irish heritage and with the global Irish community as I pursue my lessons with Irish with Mollie.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.